Green has been a powerful color since the early days of Magic. Its ability to get ahead on mana, as well as being the color with the most direct support for creatures, has led to various overpowered cards coming out at various points in the game's history. With multiple cards appearing in multiple formats ban lists, there's no shortage of options when it comes to listing cards that should be considered broken. Starting off at number 10, we have Birthing Pod. This artifact costs 3 generic and 1 Phyrexian green mana, which can be paid with either 1 green mana or with 2 life. It has an ability that allows you to pay 1 generic and 1 Phyrexian green mana, tap Birthing Pod, and sacrifice a creature to search your library for a creature card with a mana value equal to 1 plus its sacrificed creature's mana value, and put it into the battlefield. Essentially, Birthing Pod is a repeatable way to cheat any creature into play, as long as you have a creature with the appropriate mana value. The card can only be activated at sorcery speed, however, this limitation was not enough to prevent the card from being powerful. Decks built around Birthing Pod would run valuable creatures at each mana value to always have potential option in the deck to pod into. Birthing Pod encourages running a lot of one-of creatures with various niche yet powerful effects to counteract opponents' cards. Even if a card like Haywire Might doesn't have a good target in the matchup, it can be sacrificed for a different creature to Birthing Pod. These Silver Bullet type cards tend to mostly show up in sideboards, but Birthing Pod allows for these cards to see play in the main deck without sacrificing too much consistency. Beyond this, one of the most common uses for Birthing Pod is to help set it up for creature-based combos. While the sorcery speed restriction does limit the combo potential, Birthing Pod is mainly a tool to help make the deck more cohesive and consistent. Creature decks are able to flex into all sorts of options with Birthing Pods to both protect their plays and disrupt your opponent. The card was banned in the modern format thanks to the consistency it offered Devoted Druid and other creature-based combo decks in the format. The fact that you didn't have to actually spend any colored mana thanks to the Phyrexian mana cost meant any deck could consider running Birthing Pod if they want to pay that much life. The card is not banned in any other formats and is arguably the weakest card on this list. However, that speaks more to the strength of green cards throughout the game's history, since Birthing Pod is a powerful, if somewhat slow, card well worth its spot on this list. And at number 9, we have Earthcraft. This enchantment costs 1 generic and 1 green mana and allows you to tap an untapped creature to untap a basic land you control. Notably, the wording of this ability gets around Summoning Sickness, since it's Earthcraft's ability causing the tapping, not the creature itself. As such, Earthcraft, at minimum, can help refund mana from casting a creature by tapping the new creature to untap one of the lands used in casting it. In a deck like Elves, where they mostly run basic lands anyway, Earthcraft allows you to chain together 1 mana Elves for essentially free. Combined with a card like Glimpse of Nature, Earthcraft becomes an efficient engine to cheat on mana and get far ahead on board presence. The card's main source of infamy comes from its direct infinite combo potential with certain cards. The most notable card that comes with Earthcraft is Squirrel's Nest. This aura enchants a land and allows you to tap it to create a squirrel creature token with 1 power and toughness. You're then free to tap the squirrel with Earthcraft to untap the enchanted land and produce another squirrel. This combo produces infinite squirrels. And while all but one of them will be tapped, if your opponent can't answer them all, they'll just die on the next turn. And even if they do answer them all, you can restart the combo and generate more tokens. The combo itself would likely not be enough to make for a powerful deck built around it in the Legacy format, but the combo would slot easily into an already existing Enchantress deck and provide the deck not only more mana generation, but the potential of an infinite combo on turn 3 or earlier with good hands. Earthcraft was banned in Legacy before the format even officially existed, as a holdover from the ban list of the format that would be splintered off into Legacy eventually. However, the card's notoriety and strength in already existing strategies has led to the card remaining banned for the entirety of Legacy's lifespan. While the card is limited to only untapping basic lands, even with just Squirrel's Nest, it's clear that the restriction did little prevent abuse of the card. While the basic lands themselves may only produce mana, other cards used alongside them in Earthcraft can tip the advantage over into being outright game-winning. However, the cards ahead of Earthcraft on this list tend to either produce mana better or outright win the game more consistently and faster. And at number 8, we have Protean Hulk. This creature costs 5 generic and 2 green mana for a beast with 6 power and toughness. Whenever Hulk dies, you get to search your library for any number of creatures with a total mana value of 6 or less and put them into the battlefield. While this card's mana value is quite high, its death trigger is strong enough where it can essentially win the game by itself. Given that Protean Hulk can grab any creature as long as they don't exceed the mana value threshold, there are plenty of ways to combo off with the card. One of the most important parts of the combo is running creature decks that bring back a copy of Protean Hulk. Body Double becomes a copy of a creature in the graveyard, meaning you can search it alongside a creature with a mana value of 1 that lets you sacrifice a creature. The Body Double enters as Protean Hulk, and when you sacrifice it, you'll get another search as its effect. From there, you can grab combo pieces and more ways to get even more Hulk triggers, such as Karmic Guide, which functions in both roles. It both revives the Hulk to let you sacrifice it again, but the card will go infinite with another creature such as Revelark. The two creatures can bring each other back infinitely, which can be combined with a draining effect like Blood Artist to win the game on the spot. Of course, this is just one potential way of winning the game with Protean Hulk, since basically any creature-based combo with low mana value creatures is on the table with this card. Protean Hulk is even stronger when paired with the card Flash, which allows you to cast a creature at instant speed without paying its mana cost. but forces you to sacrifice the creature if you don't choose to pay the appropriate amount. For Protean Hulk, this downside is actually an upside since you want the Protean Hulk to die, meaning for just 1 generic and 1 blue mana, you can both cast Protean Hulk and get its death trigger to start the combo. This interaction is so powerful that Flash itself was banned in Legacy and Commander, but many argue that it's Protean Hulk that is the actual problem card in the combo. Regardless, Protean Hulk has become one of the most infamous creatures in the game, demanding some form of removal or answer on site, but an answer that specifically doesn't kill the creature. You have to either exile Protean Hulk or find a way to remove its abilities, since a typical kill spell will just trigger the ability you're worried about in the first place. And even a single trigger from Protean Hulk is enough to start a chain reaction that can win the game in various sorts of ways. And at number 7, we have Oath of Druids. This enchantment costs 1 generic and 1 green mana and has an ability that triggers at the beginning of each player's upkeep. That player chooses target opponent who controls more creatures than they do, then the first player may reveal cards from the top of the library until they reveal a creature card, and if they do, they put that card into the battlefield and the other cards revealed in this way into their graveyard. Essentially, this card allows you to cheat a random creature into play from your deck as long as you have an opponent who controls more creatures than you do. Decks built around Oath of the Druids run very little creatures, essentially only wanting to run creatures to cheat out and win the game with. While there's no guarantee your opponent will want to play creatures into the face of Oath of the Druids, not only does that mean you're actively holding back their plays, there are ways for the deck to give your opponent a creature to meet the requirements. And on your upkeep, if you meet the requirements, you can reveal cards until you hit something like Emrakul and essentially win the game on the spot. Even beyond that, the cards you don't hit get sent to the graveyard, which can be relevant for certain strategies. You notably cannot reliably mill your entire deck since you have to reveal a creature, meaning you can't just run no creatures and must run at least 1. However, there are enough creatures that are hard to cast but extremely powerful that Oath of the Druids is plenty playable. The card is so effective at cheating out powerful cards like Grizzlebrand that the card was even banned in the Legacy format. Green is a color that's great at cheating out creatures, and Oath of the Druids is one of the most effective ways it's ever done so. The card may be symmetrical, but unless you're playing a multiplayer game, it's very easy to build your deck in a way where only you get any advantage out of Oath of Druids at all. And at number 6, we have Once Upon a Time. This instant costs 1 generic and 1 green mana, and allows you to look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature or land card from them and put it into your hand and the rest in the bottom of your library in any order. Generally speaking, these sorts of green cantrips have seen play. However, even 1 mana value ones have only really seen play in formats like Standard and occasionally splash into older formats. What makes Once Upon a Time so effective beyond just looking at a high number of cards is that if it's the first spell you cast this game, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. The card was only given this effect because of the top-down design ideas that came from this card's name. They wanted you to start your game with Once Upon a Time, and as such incentivized you casting it as your very first spell that you played. But in practice, this allowed for decks to start the game by finding the exact card they needed. Since it costs no mana, you're essentially allowed to trade out Once Upon a Time for whatever card suits your hand best. If your hand is light on lands, you can just grab a land. If your deck is built around a specific creature and you can see the top 5 cards, you can grab it. While cantrips like this are certainly good, Once Upon a Time essentially being a free spell on the first turn makes it stronger than even most of Blue's similar card selection. This is especially effective if you're going second, since you can wait to see the card you draw for turn before casting Once Upon a Time. Even after the first turn when you've cast other spells, 2 mana isn't an unreasonable amount for Once Upon a Time's effect. This means even if you don't open it in your starting hand, the card is perfectly fine later in the game and can still help dig through your deck. The card was so ubiquitous in green decks that it would end up being banned in Pioneer and Modern, as well as the Arena format of Historic and Explorer. Wizards designers have said in hindsight, leaning so heavily into the top-down design of the card was a mistake, and giving the card its alternate free cost simply made the card too broken. And at number 5, we have Hermit Druid. For the cost of 1 generic and 1 green mana, Hermit Druid is a human druid with 1 power and toughness. You can pay 1 green mana and tap Hermit Druid to reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a basic land. Put that card into your hand and all of the cards revealed this way into the graveyard. While this effect's intended purpose is obviously to allow you to consistently find land drops, in practice, it's putting cards into the graveyard that has led to Hermit Druid being banned in the Legacy format. If your library simply does not have any basic lands in it, then activating Hermit Druid will mill your entire library. Legacy mana bases already tend to run as little basic lands as possible, with most basic lands being run mainly to get around Wasteland. As such, it's no trouble at all to build a deck that can cast Hermit Druid consistently and always mill the entire deck with it. From there, you can do all manner of graveyard related combos. If you have Necrotic Ooze, not only can you activate Hermit Druid's ability with it in the graveyard, Necrotic Ooze will inherit the abilities of all the other creatures in the graveyard as well, and allow you to win on the spot. Or you can simply just use Thassa's Oracle to win with having no cards left in your deck. Hermit Druid is an infamous card in Commander for just how effective it is at filling the graveyard and winning the game with just a single activation. The cost of building around the card is so minimal that the card functions as nothing more than a hyper-consistent combo piece with very little restriction to keep it in check. The only real limiting factor to the deck is the fragility to interaction, since if the whole graveyard gets exiled or Thassa's Oracle gets countered, then you're really in a bad spot. But these sorts of combo decks always play high risk, high reward games, and Hermit Druid remains one of the most blazing fast and consistent combo cards in green to this day. And at number 4, we have Survival of the Fittest. This enchantment costs 1 generic and 1 green mana, and has an ability that can be activated by paying 1 green mana. The ability allows you to discard a creature card to search your library for a creature card, reveal that card, and put it into your hand. As previously mentioned in other entries, green is quite effective at using creatures to set up combos or the graveyard. Survival of the Fittest exemplifies this quite well by both allowing you to put whatever creatures you want into the graveyard or your hand. With enough green mana, you can search a creature you want in the graveyard with the first activation of Survival of the Fittest, then activate Survival of the Fittest again to discard that creature and search another creature. You can then search up a card like Phyrexian Delver that will reanimate the creature you just put into the graveyard. Or you can be more straightforward and just search up whatever specific creature you need for the given scenario, giving you even more toolbox potential than a card like Birthing Pod has. Survival of the Fittest is banned in Legacy, and was never legal in formats like Modern to begin with, and it's not hard to see why. Considering that having any random creature in hand means you can trade it out for specific creatures you want, it makes green creature-focused decks all the more consistent. Some creatures like Squee, Goblin Nabob, which return to hand after being discarded, are especially valuable alongside Survival of the Fittest, as they essentially serve as fodder for survival to keep searching creatures without actually losing any cards in your hand permanently. While it wouldn't just be combo decks using the card, the already prominent creature combo decks in the format would be able to sculpt their hand exactly how they want them. Survival of the Fittest has only gotten stronger with the introduction of more creatures with strong effects in hand, such as the Evoke Elementals. Survival of the Fittest can be used to grab Endurance or another Evoke Elemental and essentially allow you to search up interaction you otherwise wouldn't have access to. Survival of the Fittest simply makes things too easy for creature decks, giving you the exact creatures you want for very little cost. And at number 3, we have Golgari Grave Troll. This troll skeleton costs 4 generic and 1 green mana that has 0 power and toughness. It enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature card in your graveyard. You can pay 1 generic mana and remove a +1/+1 counter from Golgari Grave Troll to regenerate it. Regenerate is the keyword, which replaces the next time a permanent would be destroyed with instead tapping it, removing all damage from it, and removing it from combat if necessary. Essentially, Regenerate allows you to save a creature that would otherwise die. While these are fine abilities and an overall not terrible creature that scales with your graveyard, what makes this card so broken is its last ability. Golgari Grave Troll has a Dredge 6, which means if you would draw a card, you may mill 6 cards instead. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. Essentially, as long as Golgari Grave Troll is in your graveyard, you can replace an instance of drawing a card with dredging instead. Dredge is an extremely powerful keyword ability that lets you fill your graveyard with extreme ease. Of the 14 cards in the game with Dredge, Golgari Grave Troll mills the most cards at 6. And decks built around dredging often want to mill as many cards as possible as early as possible to trigger their deck's build-around effects. Golgari Grave Troll provided not only the most potential mill with a single dredge trigger, but also offered a strong body for the long games. Dredge has seen success in various formats, with Golgari Grave Troll outright banned in Modern for how strong it was in self-milling decks. More impressive, however, is the fact that Golgari Grave Troll is also restricted in Vintage, a format that avoids banning cards outright and will instead only allow you to play a single copy. Bazaar Baghdad provides Dredge decks so much consistency alongside Golgari Grave Troll that many Vintage Dredge decks don't run ways to produce mana at all, simply leveraging the powerful mill effects like Dredge to get the ball rolling. While other Dredge cards, such as Life from Loam, are also quite playable, it's Golgari Grave Troll that stands above the rest. In the modern game, there are other creatures that are able to mill through your deck quite quickly if used properly, but few are as effective and easy to break as Golgari Grave Troll. And at number 2, we have Channel. For 2 green mana, Channel is a sorcerer that allows you to, until end of turn, and at any time you can activate a mana ability, you may pay 1 life to add 1 colorless mana. Paying life tends to be a mechanic reserved mostly for black, yet Channel comes from the first set of Magic where color identity wasn't fully fleshed out yet. As such, this green spell allows you to pay as much life as you want in exchange for mana. Unlike other cards where it took years of new releases and game changes for it to become notably broken, Channel was game-winningly powerful as early as Alpha. In that very same set, the card Fireball was printed. This spell costs X generic and 1 red mana and deals X damage to a target. While you can pay extra to target extra cards, the most effective use of Fireball initially was to simply target your opponent directly. With Channel, as long as you had more life than your opponent and enough lands, you'd be able to pay all but 1 life to make a Fireball with a value of X high enough that your opponent lost on the spot. This 2-card combo was so infamous that beyond Channel's eventual ban in most formats, the name itself would become an iconic part of the Magic community, with a major card retailer and tournament organizer adopting the name, Channel Fireball, as a homage to Magic's first proper 2-card combo. And seeing as how Channel was already able to win the game in commanding fashion as early as Alpha, future cards would only prove to be all the more problematic alongside Channel. A deck like Death Shadows would be able to freely manipulate its own life total and get as low as it wanted, and other decks would likely find more efficient spells to kill with than Fireball. While green has always been efficient at generating mana, the amount of mana Channel can generate in one go is simply too high and too free. Life is a resource in Magic, and it's generally considered wise to use your life aggressively if it can help you win, and Channel is perhaps the textbook definition of this. At the time it's printed in Alpha, life gain and life totals in general were overvalued by the designers. Channel was balanced with the idea that paying life so aggressively was an actual downside, and that you'd potentially be in real danger of losing if you paid too much. But in practice, Channel's ability encourages the opposite sort of play, with the most optimal path to pay as much life as you can and try to win right then and there. Channel was never legal in most formats at all, and remains banned or restricted in every format it was originally eligible for. There is no format in Magic where you can play Channel without any restriction because of its undercosted and extremely overpowered ability. And finally, at number 1, we have Fastbond. This enchantment costs 1 green mana and allows you to play any number of lands on each of your turns. Whenever you play a land that wasn't the first land you played this turn, Fastbond deals 1 damage to you. Fastbond shares many similarities with our previous entry Channel, in that it's a low value mana card that allows you to get ahead on mana in exchange for losing life. But where Channel is essentially a ritual that gives you 1 burst of mana, Fastbond instead offers you permanent land-based mana ramp. Of course, this does require you to have lands in hand to get proper value out of Fastbond, whereas Channel itself doesn't need cards in hand to generate mana. But this trade-off is well worth it, since you're less reliant on ending the game right then and there. If you cast Channel without a way to win the game, you're essentially wasting that Channel, whereas a turn 1 Fastbond will always be good, since you'll always have the option on board to play the lands you draw. And if you do have lands in hand to go alongside Fastbond, then for just a few life, you're able to get multiple turns ahead on mana and outpace your opponent substantially. Fastbond also notably does not limit you playing lands from just your hand, meaning if you have a card like Remnant Excavator, you're able to freely play lands from your graveyard via Fastbond's ability as well. Playing lands from the graveyard with Fastbond, along with something such as Fetch Land that lets you sacrifice it to search another land from your deck, and suddenly you're able to pull most of the lands from your deck as long as you have enough life. And there are multiple ways to offset the life loss of Fastbond so that you can keep going and play more lands. But unlike Channel, Fastbond is less reliant on being used solely as a combo piece. Fastbond's mana ramp is so strong that even if you're only getting a few extra lands out of it, it's still giving you more value than most ramp spells with much higher mana values. The card is only legal in the Vintage format, where the land-themed decks run the card quite frequently given its strength and the strategy. While there is certainly room for debate on the exact order of cards, there's no denying that Fastbond is one of the most broken green cards to ever exist, taking its established ability to ramp and produce mana and pushing it far past the logical limits of the color. Alright, and that's the list. Are there any other green cards you think we may have missed, or have any ideas for future videos just like this one? If so, please let us know down in the comments below.